Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. My colleague and co-host Gordon Chang joins me tonight. We're spending all evening in Asia. There's trouble in China, big trouble in China. There's trouble in the South China Sea. There are serial protests, violent protests throughout China. They are not organized, but they're very much driven by people who have had too much of the brutality and arbitrary authoritarianism of the regime. Most interesting is one incident that was generated by brutality towards street vendors, very much like what we saw in Tunis that started the Arab Spring. Good evening, Gordon.
Good evening, John.
And the protests in China wait for the first news, which is you go where the biggest trouble is in Asia, and that remains at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plants. Within these last hours, an important first step towards answering the problem of 105,000 tons of irradiated water still inside the plant as we await cold shutdown, not until January. Joining us right now is Chris Gadomski, who is the lead analyst for nuclear of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. He's in studio with us. Chris, again, a very good evening to you. The French have a filter. It was to begin on Sunday, a test to pull out that irradiated water. It didn't begin till today. First, what is the threat? What is the timeline? Why do they have to act now to get that irradiated water pulled out?
Well, they have to act quickly because they're adding 500 tons of water every day to keep the reactors cool. Within 2 weeks of doing this, they'll fill up the basements of the reactor building and water will overflow and go into the sea. So they'd like to go ahead and address the problem to sort of recycle the water that's being filling up the reactor buildings so they will not have to release it to the radioactive water to the sea.
Well, Chris, there have been a couple of releases of radioactive water into the sea because they were running out of places for storage. Has that had any big effect on the radioactivity in the sea, or has it just dissipated because the sea is so big?
Well, the old adage is that if you're going to pollute, you should dilute. So the Pacific Ocean is a huge place to go ahead and dilute radioactive water. We'd never want to go ahead and do that, but in this case, it's an appropriate strategy given the alternative, which is overheating of the reactors.
The Fukushima Daiichi is not in the daily news here, but when I read and hear the reports from Japan, they're dealing with this crisis on a daily basis because there is no one answer right now. Is that true, Chris, that they have individual problems that they must deal with individually?
Yes, they have 3 reactors which have either full or partial core meltdowns, which is a disastrous situation, and they have to go ahead and deal with stabilizing those reactors which are still not stabilized. And the attempt is to keep them cool by adding water. And now they need to go ahead and spread stop the spread of radiation that still is coming out from those reactors.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the typhoon season is coming, and so is the rainy season. And what does that mean, Chris?
Well, that means more water from natural causes threatening the facilities. And also it becomes very, very hard. Don't forget there's about 2,500 people working on the site, and they're clad and wearing radiation protective gear, and it's very, very hard. It's very hot for them to work it. So the strain on the people who are working is going to increase with the heat and temperature.
So, Chris, they've got other nuclear power plants in Japan. What are the people in Japan saying about whether they want to have electricity from nuclear power? Because we saw the Germans say no. We've seen the Italians had a referendum on it. What do the Japanese think?
Opposition to nuclear power is growing in Japan. It's about 49% of the people are opposing additional use of nuclear power. But we're entering a very, very critical period. It's the time that I'm calling the nuclear air conditioning period. It's going to be very hot, clammy, and uncomfortable in Tokyo and the rest of Japan, and people have to decide whether they want to bring on those reactors that have been taken offline for periodic inspections to make sure everything is okay, or people are going to have the cool air conditioning from the nuclear power, or they're going to suffer and get hot and sticky.
What does cold shutdown mean? Why are we looking forward to it, and what does it mean once we achieve it?
Cold shutdown is when you have the fuel at 100 degrees centigrade and it's stabilized, and we do not have that there. We're not anticipating getting there, and for the Japanese estimates, until January of 2012.
And once we're there, does that make everything easier at the plant, or does that mean that we're going to create new problems when you have to go in there and dismantle these wrecks?
Well, then now we have to start dealing with the effect of the explosions causing the disaster. Cold shutdown means that we're at a point where the reactor is stable and we can start to do the work we intend to go ahead and do.
And right now, the water, this irradiated water, they're adding, you say, 500 tons a day.
That's correct.
As they pump. That means that at some point they're going to reach the brim full in the basements of these buildings. Do they have an estimate of what that date is?
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now.
That's correct.
Gordon, this is everything a Hollywood movie needs.
Yeah, you got
2
a
weeks
deadline.
from now, it's too late, and the water starts spilling into the ocean. That doesn't necessarily mean disaster, right? I mean, spilling into the ocean, they can absorb that for a time. But what do we know about the Japanese opinion of the radiation that's already spread? There have been increasingly more dire reports of what happened in March, and that's changed my perception of the clarity of Japanese reports.
The Japanese did not accurately disseminate all the information, but don't forget, this was in the wake of a tremendous natural disaster. So they are installing additional radiation monitoring equipment throughout Tokyo and through the area, and they're trying to make a concerted effort to inform the Japanese people of the consequences and the levels of radiation.
Let's bring it home. San Onofre and Diablo Canyon in California, Indian Point in New York, and there's one in Missouri, I believe.
Right.
All of these are near fault zones. What is the opinion right now, or is it under review by the U.S. government about those plants?
The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has investigated all of those plants and made various recommendations. The situation in Indian Point, just 35 miles from where we sit, it sits in close proximity to a fault, but the fault is very, very different from the fault that was laying offshore for the Japanese reactors. But nevertheless, there's growing interest in shutting that down because of the danger it poses to, if something bad happened, we're so close to New York City.
And San Onofre and Diablo Canyon, both near the populated Southern California regions.
Absolutely. And they have passed there's no danger of meltdown in case there's an adverse effect. But don't forget, the source of the problem was not the earthquake, it was the tsunami. And they underestimated the level of the tsunami seawalls that were provided for in Fukushima. And one could be said that maybe perhaps the same situation exists in San Onofre.
So you could, for instance, have an earthquake in Japan. You could have the tsunami cross the Pacific, and that would be real spell disaster for all of those plants on the coast, right?
Well, I understand that the geological arrangement near the San Onofre plant is that they anticipate that they will not have such a disastrously high tsunami. But I'm not a tsunami expert, but it's something that I think people are looking at.
You work for Bloomberg, and you're the lead analyst for nuclear fuel, new energy. This situation in Fukushima Daiichi, it isn't done yet. There could be twists in the road. What has it done for the growth of the nuclear industry worldwide? Is there a result yet in?
There's not a result. We're seeing an erosion of support. We've been monitoring that, and we're coming out with a 100-day report in a few days. We have seen some interesting developments. One of the most interesting developments is that the Saudis announced they're going to build 16 to 20 reactors by the year 2030 at a huge expense. On the other hand, the Italians have had a referendum and said that they are not going to go forward with nuclear power. They were anticipating building 6 to 9 nuclear power plants in the years ahead, and they decided that they don't want to do that.
And here in the United States, is there a collective opinion yet? Are people still reading the news? Is the government still thinking about it? Have you seen any initiative out of Congress?
There is a big conference in a few weeks down in Washington, D.C., but don't forget there's 5 reactors under construction, and it's their pleasure and wonder to see them being built. But it depends what will follow after that initial construction.
And Gordon, there's one big reactor in China, one big reactor being constructed in China.
There's a lot of big reactors being constructed in China, and they're going full bore. That's the thing that really worries the people in China, because they're just building these things like crazy.
Chris, and for the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, we cannot say that they have right now solved the threat. Is that correct? We cannot say that tonight.
I would agree with you 100%.
All right, Fukushima Daiichi, the test started today. Areva is the company in France that made the filter that is testing to pull out 105,000 tons of irradiated water before it overfills the basements and pours into the Pacific Ocean. that comes to a beach near you. Chris Gadomski of Bloomberg, Gordon Chang of Forbes.com and The Daily. I'm John Batchelor.